Hey friends, welcome back for day 2 of Privilege Week. Today we're going to take it up a notch and look at societal level privilege. These are going to be things, kind of like I mentioned before, that are based on the social construct that we created. These narratives that have been crafted over time. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Starting with everyone's favorite, male privilege. You should probably know a lot about this by now, but of course I'll go into it because we're all here to learn and again maybe have a little bit of a good time. So there's obviously endless examples of this, but I'll name off a couple that came to mind when I was writing this. Men get paid more than women. Men generally can walk home at night without the fear of being raped. Men can pretty much dress however they want. Men don't have to worry about potentially sidelighting their careers to have children. Men don't have to adhere to as many beauty standards. These are the advantages. Just a small portion of them, but they allow men to live a life that is essentially very different than women and other people in this society. For example, men have higher advancements in jobs, more security, safety, the list goes on and on. Now, these things don't necessarily make men bad, but if you exploit them, then yes, you are bad. For example, toxic masculinity and many other forms of this sort of thing. So what can we do about it? First, we have to know ourselves well enough to not be triggered by these sorts of things. We should, as men, speak up about these problems, raise the voices of women and everyone else. Call out dudes for being toxic, because obviously we all know, or hope we know, that shit's not cool. And this is, again, all of these are just short lists and examples. I'll link a bunch of stuff below, so if you want to dive in deeper, which you should, they'll be down there. Of course, on the flip side, there is female privilege. A few examples: women are statistically more likely to end up with their children during divorce regardless of how the parents are. We live in a society where men are expected to pay for things and be the breadwinner. It's much more acceptable for women to talk about mental health issues, even though men commit suicide at a much higher rate. The list goes on, but again, these are just quick examples. You can't necessarily fix them all, and as I mentioned with male privilege, this doesn't apply to everyone's. Again, unless you're exploiting it, and then that would make you bad. So what can people do? Pretty much the same thing I said for male privilege. Acknowledge it, internalize it, and then take action. Resources, again, will be down in the description. Now let's take a look at race privilege, starting with light skin privilege. If you saw my video last week on colorism, you'll already know this. Alex and I are both black, but the way the world is, Alex has the advantage. Alex, as a light-skinned black person, has an advantage over me, who is a dark-skinned black person. In the eyes of those with biases, and everyone has bias, he has the advantage in many different ways. He shouldn't feel guilty about that, but acknowledging it is incredibly important. Next, Asian American privilege. Have you heard the term model minority? There is a bias that Asian Americans are the more successful minority because of culture, education, hard work, etc. And this is used as a comparison point to other minorities. So when comparing myself to Andrea, because of society, she has a leg up on me. But also because of gender, I, as a man, have a leg up on her, which can get complicated, but it's not that hard to understand. It's just acknowledging the different types of privilege, which we both have done. We can both acknowledge this and do our best to be aware of the situation so that we can help and lift each other up when needed. Next, let's talk about able-bodied privilege. This is one that I feel like a lot of people overlook. Every single one of us is able-bodied. And you probably are too. If you can hear, if you can see, if you know physical or psychological disabilities, then you have able-bodied privilege, among other things. You don't have to think about if there's going to be a wheelchair ramp, or if there's going to be someone signing at the concert you go to, or the public speaking event, or if the police are going to mistake something that happens within you as something that is more than just an episode. So how can you help? Just be cognizant of the fact that you have able-bodied privilege. We can all do a little bit more to help even the playing field and make the world a better place for everybody. One quick example is if you own a bar, make sure there's a wheelchair ramp. It's super simple, even if your state doesn't mandate it. If you think about some of the things that you, as a privileged person, don't have to think about, then you can make the world better for everyone else. I hope you see the correlation I'm making. Or if you're a public speaker, pay those extra dollars to get someone on stage with you that will translate to sign language. This is huge for someone, you know what I mean? It's these little steps, these maybe big steps, that we can all do to make the world a bit of a better place. Now let's talk about class privilege or financial privilege. This honestly probably needs its own video because it's kind of a big topic, but we'll touch on it quickly. All of us grew up majority of our lives in the Western New York area. While some of us grew up with more money than others, we all have certain privileges based on where we grew up. We all have certain advantages and disadvantages based on where we live, how much money our parents made, and the opportunities that came from that. None of which we as kids had any control over. Each one of our parents, I assume, worked really hard to get where they're at, and people that made less money than our parents would, I'm assuming, also worked really hard to get the money that they had. But living in the areas that we did, Canandaigua, Buffalo, Youngstown, and Lewiston, we didn't have to worry as much about money. That is our privilege, but let's dive a little deeper to explain some more. I'll take myself for an example. I don't know how my mom did it, but we had a very comfortable childhood. We didn't have a lot of money, but we lived in a predominantly white town with minimal racism, and I had opportunities to get a job at a younger age so I could buy stuff that I wanted and not have to rely on my mom, which is great for everybody. This gives me an advantage over someone that grew up in a poorer neighborhood that didn't have such a nurturing, loving childhood. Shout out to Mary. Another privilege that I acknowledge is the way that I speak. Growing up in Canandaigua, I speak like this, and whether you like it or not, it resonates with you better because a lot of you also sound like me, or similar. Everyone's got their little accents. So this gives me an advantage over people that might look like me but don't sound like me. I don't feel guilty that I sound like this, and people tend to listen better to people that sound like themselves. Rather, I use my literal voice to raise awareness for people that look like me but don't necessarily have this advantage. See what I mean? It's the same idea with white privilege. No one is saying you didn't work hard. No one is saying you should feel that white guilt. We just want you to acknowledge it, and then if you're able to, do something positive for those who don't have it. This could be buying from minority business for work, or making videos like I do, or if you're a teacher, boosting up that little black kid in your classroom. There are so many ways that you can be helpful to make the world a better place. Not everything is gonna fix everything, but things can help. In tomorrow's video, I'm gonna get super specific about the ways that white privilege affect people, using examples from my own experience and those that we've probably seen on the news, and comparing them to my friend Don. Don and I actually have a shockingly similar origin story, so I think the comparison will be really good to help put things in perspective. So stay tuned for tomorrow's video. If you have any questions, comments, ideas, thoughts, or want to buy t-shirts, comment down below. Peace.
And then